In this module, we're looking at implementing your course. And this is part of a wider course enhancement cycle. So it's after you've designed and after you've developed your materials for your course, and then you're in the implementation phase. So when we're looking at implementing your course, there are a couple of things that we're looking at in particular. The first one is facilitating the implementation of the actual course, and the second part is looking at facilitating your teaching team. So when we're looking at facilitating the implementation of your course, this is looking at, in particular, establishing an environment that supports learning, setting the learning and teaching context, using active learning strategies, using feedback for learning, and monitoring the course. And it's these last two that we'll have a look in more detail within the module. As well as that, you'll also be leading your teaching team. So you'll be developing a shared understanding of the course learning and teaching goals, processes, and practices. And this will be done with your teaching team. You'll also be facilitating collaborative processes. You'll be facilitating collegial conversations, encouraging team members to create a culture of learning and reflective practice in your course, facilitating reflection on teaching team processes and practices, and also supporting your team members to engage in professional learning. And within this module, we'll very much be looking at developing a shared understanding of the learning and teaching goals, facilitating collegial conversations, and facilitating reflection on teaching team processes and practices. So to set us up for that, let's have a look a little bit about reflective practice. Ramsden reminds us that evaluation is not at heart about collecting evidence to justify yourself or about measuring the relative worth of courses or teachers. It's really about coming to understand teaching in order to improve student learning. This is our moral purpose. Enhancing student learning. So when we have a look at reflective practice, and this is happening during your teaching, this is happening as you're actually doing it, this is happening when you're reflecting after it, it's looking at all those things that you're doing in your learning and teaching practice. And this has been a highly recognised aspect of teaching in higher education for a while now. Reflection in and on and about practice is essential to actually developing the capabilities of teachers or educators to think and act professionally over the span of not only the course, but obviously across careers. Dewey, way back in 1933, talked about reflection as an active, persistent and careful consideration of any belief or supposed form of knowledge in light of the grounds supporting it and future considerations to which it tends. So what it's talking about there is really, it's an active process, and it not only informs what's happening right now, but also into the future. Another thing to think about as well is if we're really aiming for transformative learning, this happens in our own teaching practice when we as educators critically examine our practice. So we're really coming to look at how can we enhance our practice, and that really entails us looking at assumptions that we make about learning and teaching. So through this critical reflective practice, we as educators critically examine our assumptions that underlie our practice, the consequences of these assumptions, and we develop alternative perspectives on our practices. So let's have a look at some models of reflective practice. Here are some that are used widely in higher education. So the first one is looking at Gibbs' 1988 learning by doing model. And in Gibbs's model, and this is a very basic model of reflective practice, but it looks at describing what's happened, also tapping into those feelings, evaluating what's happening, doing a description about that, concluding that, and creating an action plan. So we're putting things back in action, ready to do the next learning loop. It is a very surface level reflection, and it doesn't do much critical reflection on assumptions about learning and teaching. Another model is Kolb, 1984, Experiential Learning Model, and it goes through a cycle of looking at, through a concrete experience, there's reflected observation. We then try to make some abstract conceptualization around that, trying to link it in with some knowledge base or theory, and then we actively experiment with these and we go round the cycle again. Once again, this is taking it into theory to practice, or practice to theory, but it doesn't really go very deep into doing that critical practice. Schon in 1983 and also 1991 to really embrace the idea of a reflective practitioner, and this is where we're reflecting in action and we're also reflecting on action. So there are two ways of reflecting. So whilst we're actually doing a practice, our teaching practice, or whether we're working with our team, we can actually reflect on what we're doing. And then we can do it afterwards as well. So after the actual event has happened, we can reflect on the action that has actually happened. So this is after the event. Argyris and Schon talked a lot about double loop learning, and this is where, other than looking at things and seeing things from what has actually happened, so the events, we're actually not only reflecting on what's happened and how we could improve that, but this is where we start considering the various assumptions that we may be making in our particular context. So we can go back and really go a little bit deeper, and this is double loop learning. And Driscoll in 1994 used a model that has become known as the what, so what, and now what. And so this is very much starting to go into that deeper level of the meaning making around the reflection. So it's asking what has actually happened, what is the meaning in this when we get to the so what, and now what am I going to do about it? So we're starting to go a little bit deeper, looking at some assumptions that are happening in context. We come to Brookfield's 2005 Becoming Critically Reflective, and this is where Brookfield describes that there are 4 lenses we can actually do reflections on our practice. We can look at it from our own perspective, that's the self, and we can then evaluate and reflect on what's been happening in our practice and can go to that deeper level. We can also gather information from students and from peers and their own feedback about our particular practice. And lastly, we can access information around scholarship or a theoretical perspective on this particular practice that we're doing. And lastly, Mezirow's 1990 model that involves transformative learning. And this talks about 3 layers of reflection: a content reflection, so that's where we're thinking about the actual experience; a process reflection, which is where we're thinking about ways to deal with the experience and improve it; and then there's a premise reflection. This is where we're examining long-held and socially constructed assumptions, beliefs and values about the experience or problem. So what model of reflection might you use? They were some common models that are used. Do any of those resonate with you? And what steps have you taken to critically reflect on your practice? What insights have been generated through that critical reflection, and how could you use these insights to enhance your practice in order to enhance your students' learning? So that's been the module overview and a brief introduction to reflective practice. So now there are plenty of other activities and experiences through the module. So I look forward to hearing your experiences with the module. Enjoy.